Chris Delphov. I've been competing. I've actually only competed raw once, so I've been competing for about 10 years, and it's all been multiply. I've competed at 220, 242, 275, have elite totals in all 3 weight classes, 1,000-pound squats in all 3 weight classes, 800-pound pulls in all 3 weight classes. So I've seen the whole kind of spectrum of different equipment, different brands, different styles, tightnesses, all that. So I want to educate, and I want more people to be aware that multiply lifting is cool. Everyone kind of started lifting or is competing to get strong, put the biggest total together that they can, and multiply lifting helps that. Obviously, you hear people say, "Oh, it's all the suit, it's all the shirt," and anyone who's never lifted in multiply gear before and puts it on, they're like, "Oh wow, this shit's really hard." And that's the response you always get for someone who is uneducated or doesn't know what they're talking about. So the more that people who have been doing this for a long time can educate, the more we're hoping that multiply lifting can grow. I mean, everyone can see that there's if you're new to the sport and you've only been competing for handful of years, everything's raw, right? Everything's raw now. There's huge raw numbers going, huge raw numbers. Guys and girls especially, are really strong, okay? But 5-10 years ago, it was all multiply lifting. Like I remember when I first started competing, I would sit in class because I didn't want to do any work and watch old WPO videos from the Army, right?Here they're on stage. You remember those videos, like Matt Kroc and Chuck.
Yeah, I had a poster of Matt Kroc in the bedroom. It's kind of weird now.
A little different now,
but yeah, guys like that were definitely an inspiration, and I mean that was. It was a show.
It was a show, and there's recently, there's been a falling away from it. You could agree with that, right? Yeah. And now I've seen in the past couple, a little bit. There's kind of
a little bit of a resurgence.
People kind of coming back, and the more people that kind of get on board, the bigger it's going to get again, and hopefully get to that point.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of bounce back on what Chris is saying. We won't. There are options.
Right.
There are options. If you want to go in and do a meet and do it completely like raw, and like not even wear a belt and stuff, like that's like your own personal preference. If you want to wear wrist wraps, a belt. If you want to wear sleeves, knee wraps. You want to use a monolift. You want to walk it out. Like there's many ways to kind of many ways to skin a cat. There's many ways to get stronger. There's many ways to compete. I've been doing this for over 10 years now, and it's just even just for like just a mental break. Like, hey, I'm gonna do this meet in a suit. I'm gonna do this meet raw with wraps. I'm gonna just to switch it up a little bit from now, and just to kind of keep you in the game longer. Now, if you want to be more competitive, obviously specializing in one can be helpful, but there's nothing wrong with just like sometimes doing a single lift, or sometimes doing a bench only meet in a shirt, or whatever the case may be. But there's other options, and I think one of the reasons I think there is a resurgence is because some people are getting hurt, they're banged up, or maybe we'll talk about that. But and it allows some people to have more longevity because it is going to provide some compression. So even though you're lifting more weight, you're going to compress the shoulders and compress the hips. So maybe sometimes lifters tear a pec or something, or they tear their groin, and that can give you some support, some briefs and like a bench shirt, or can give you some support too. It doesn't have to be so aggressive. Also, you can take it as aggressive as you want. So maybe you can kind of talk about that and differences in equipment and what it actually does.
So I was going to say, we're not saying that everyone needs to jump into 3-ply briefs and 3-ply suit with super tight knee wraps and all that stuff. It's like John said, it's an option, and you don't have to do it all at one time, right? You can just start with wraps, and then go to maybe loose briefs, and then maybe try tight briefs, and then maybe a loose suit, or a super loose shirt just to kind of feel, find your groove. There's nothing saying that if you're going to start multiply lifting, you need to jump all in to super tight aggressive gear, because that, I've seen lifters try and do that, and I'm sure you have too, where they get super tight briefs and they take a quarter squat and they're like, oh, this sucks, and then they never put their briefs back on.
Yeah.
Because it's too tight and they don't know what they're doing. So it almost makes a little bit more sense to err on the side of loose your gear, I would, in my opinion, at first, until you're comfortable and your technique's sound, and then kind of get a little bit more aggressive.
Cool. And then can you maybe just talk about like what the gear actually does, and maybe just some, you know, what the philosophy is behind, like, you know, when you're trying to stretch the material and just kind of put it on, like what is the gear actually doing for you? Like what is it, like when you put it on, like what does that kind of do for your body?
So when I first started powerlifting and saw this, I saw gear and it was, oh, if you put gear on, you're gonna lift more weight. So that's the reason why I got into gear. But now I'm actually kind of glad I did, because besides my pec, the only injury that's really the only injury I've had, and that was done lifting raw. So.
And I think, were you that heavy or?
No, it was like a working set.
That's weird. Sometimes it's, you know, that happens sometimes.
It just kind of goes.
Yeah.
So the longevity, the gear, in theory, should protect you. It's either going to be made of canvas or polyester. In most cases, it's going to be overly tight or tight. Overly tight, the more aggressive you get, and it's going to protect your joints, shoulders, hips. The knee wraps obviously protect your knees, and it's just going to provide compression to, one, keep you safer, more safe, whatever, I'm a teacher, it doesn't matter. And obviously, the more you load the gear, the more you're going to be able to lift, if it's done properly.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, I like to use kind of like the analogy of, you know, raw lifting and equipped lifting is related, but it's a different sport. So it's almost like, you know, you could have a race on foot, you could have a race on bicycle, you could have a race in a car, and that's kind of like multiply lifting, that extreme. So they're kind of related. Like it's, you know, it is a sport of how much you can lift, but it really is apples to oranges. So like they're both fruits, but it's different. So comparing someone's like raw total to their equipped total, some people get more carryover, some people don't.
Right.
But there's more of a skill component, so the more equipment you add, there's a more skill component involved, and there's going to be some differences. And maybe you can talk about some like the differences, maybe also even like from what muscle groups are used, and some different kind of, you know, similarities and differences between like.
So we'll take a squat for example. You can squat beltless, you can squat with a belt, you can squat with sleeves, you can squat with wraps, you can squat with really tight wraps, you can squat with briefs and sleeves, briefs and wraps, the whole thing. So all of that is going to be, in theory, it's a different movement.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to squat completely raw like you would in wraps and with briefs on and with a suit on, straps up, tight knee wraps, full gear. So like kind of like John said, it's you're powerlifting, but every time you're adding more equipment, there's an additional layer of skill involved. And technique that you have to learn, and it's not just going to come with just throwing, you know, adding another ply or adding another layer or going tighter wraps or tighter suit or adding, you know, a 5-ply shirt, right? If you don't know how to bench in a 1-ply shirt, then adding more plies isn't necessarily going to help. You're just going to be in a worse position with 5 plies, which doesn't feel very good anyway. But, you know, muscle group wise, I would say as soon as you start adding gear, you're working more, talking about a squat, more glutes, hips, hamstrings, your posterior chain, as opposed to your quads. I would say if you watch any good multiply lifter, they obviously have big legs, but if you were to compare the size of their quads to their hamstrings, you're going to see much more meatier hamstrings, because they're technique-wise, they should be sitting back, using those bigger muscle groups, using their hips, using their glutes, using their hamstrings. So again, 2 lifters, they're both squatting, but you could have a geared lifter and a raw lifter squat completely different, and it will look, you know, totally not the same.
Yeah. I think sometimes it can be confusing for some people when they see someone going out that wide and stuff, and Can you, for the people that are kind of newer, can you explain like why they might wanna, like why it's an advantage to, like why, first of all, why can they, and then why do they
So
go
the
like that?
reason why you're able to do things wider, whether you're squatting or benching in gear, why you're able to do it wider is because the gear is protecting those joints, right? If you're benching raw and you typically are, shoulder width apart, and you're going now, you throw a shirt on, you're all the way outside the rings, right? That would put you in a more susceptible place to injury, right? The shirt kind of takes that away by providing that tightness to your shoulders, and the way that it loads, it's not loading your joints as much, where it's actually loading the shirt. It's loading, if you've ever got a very thick collared shirt, right? You're getting the most out of that shirt because you're loading the collar. You're not putting that strain on your pec, on your shoulders, so you're protected, but also the wider you go, the less of a range of motion, right? You bench here, but you bench, and then you bench here, you could take 6-7 inches off your stroke, right? Or the goal is to lift the most amount of weight possible, right? It's not to have big bodybuilder pecs. Those, no one cares about that. So your goal is to lift the most amount of weight possible. So the shorter stroke you have, the more weight in theory you should lift. So if you're benching, you want to bench as wide as possible. If you're squatting, in theory you should try and squat as wide as possible because there's less of a range of motion. The reason why you're able to do that is because of the gear, right? The gear allows you to get, fall all the way out here and still squat and not, pop everything and pop your hips and your groin and all that bad stuff, which would be bad.
Yeah.
So all that stuff is, you're able to do that because of the gear, but you also want to get the most out of the gear. So get as wide as you can, get comfortable being in those uncomfortable positions, because it's going to lead to you being able to handle more weight.
Yeah, I'd say also like when you go wider, it's going to stretch the material more, so you can potentially get more out of it. I think it's probably why Mark Bell calls slingshot a slingshot. It's like a slingshot. The more you stretch it, the more potential there is for like pop out of the bottom, where you're going to be the most susceptible to injury, most vulnerable. It's going to give you support where you need it the most. So yeah, it's just, and there's going to be a little bit more skill involved as well. But yeah, just like your muscles will stretch in the bottom, the gear will stretch. The more you can kind of push out in the material, you could potentially get like more out of it and just have that more support. So
I think of it like a rubber band. The more you stretch the rubber band, when you snap it back, the more it's going to hurt. So it's the same thing. If you're only stretching it this far, it's going to give you some support and it's going to give you that pop. But if you stretch it this far, right, it's going to give you a lot more.
And I think just to kind of piggyback what Chris said about muscle groups, I have always found that your trunk stability, so like the muscles in your lats and upper back and your trunk, like we talked about glutes for hips, it's going to be more important that you can maintain position. You can't really muscle through a heavy set of,
You're not muscling through. If you have 1,000 pounds on your back, I don't care how strong you are, if you're not in the right position, it's going to bury you. So it's your positioning, it's your technique that is going to kind of help you more so than anything else. So if you're constantly training and your chest is collapsing with lighter weights, when you just throw a suit on, it's not going to magically keep your chest up, right? That's going to come from your core work, your technique, the way that you're bracing everything. That's what's going to help you handle those heavy loads, right? Just throwing on a tight pair of briefs isn't going to allow you to get under the bar and squat 900 pounds, right? It's going to be your core strength, your lats, your upper back, your positioning more so than adding gear, right? I keep going back to that because the answer isn't always to just add more gear, especially if you're just starting. It's get strong in looser gear or get strong in general, and then when you get comfortable, technique gets better, then maybe get a little bit tighter pair of briefs or wrap your knees a little bit tighter, because just adding more gear isn't going to necessarily help you. It could hurt you.
Can you talk about the process of, let's say you get some new equipment, it's off the shelf, it's probably stiffer, it hasn't been used before. Some people, like you talked about, they may squat high or they may not be able to touch. and then they kind of get frustrated. Can you just talk about the process of like breaking into
Yeah,
equipment?
so I'll talk bench shirt first because I think
Yeah.
it's a little bit easier
Sure.
to break in a shirt. And I'll rewind. There's different trains of thought
Yeah.
for everything. You can go talk to another multi-ply lifter and say, don't listen to that asshole, he has no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of piggyback off that, like we're always going to talk about from our experience.
Right.
And I think that it's like, and obviously it's going to be a little bit different for everyone, but just, so I think that's a good place
So
for context,
just,
you know.
I'm talking not as the end all be all of multi-ply lifting. And John, would say the same thing. So this is from our perspective. This is what we've done and handled and over the past 10, however many years. But as far as bench shirt, I always like to work the shirt down in boards. I know some people hate boards. They say boards are stupid. Don't use boards. Blah, blah. I don't care. Okay. Especially a tighter shirt, right? If you've ever gotten into a tight shirt and you try and start and row, it's not going anywhere. You can put as much weight on the bar as you want, and if you get in a tight shirt, it's not going anywhere. And you can sit there all day, and it's just okay. I'm still 6 inches away. All right. So you need to break in the material, right? The material is stiff. That's the whole point, right? The stiffer the material, the more pop you get, the more weight, ideally, you lift. So you need to break in that material, but you need to break in that material in your groove, right? We'll talk about that, right? But in your groove. So when you're benching, right, you don't just want to just kind of, try and touch at your belly button, right? Because that's not going to benefit anybody. Right, so you want to make sure that you're working that groove. So what I do is I like to work down in boards. Maybe start with a 4-board, and I like triples. I don't like to do anything more than a triple in here because I get tired, very honestly. And I don't like to just do singles because then you're not getting as many reps in the gear. So especially in my shirt, I get a new shirt, I'll hit triples to a 4, and then I'll try and take the same weight down to a 3.
It's progression.
Progression down, and then if the weight's not heavy enough, then I'll add a little bit of weight and then go back up to the 4. Hit 3 more triples. Next set, bring it down to a 3 until I'm hitting that weight comfortably, not killing myself to try and hit a 3-board, but also with good technique, right? You don't just want to just kind of I'm at the board. Oh well, I can't bench to my belly button if there's no board. So you want to make sure that you're progressing down in boards, but also if you can maintain that same weight, let's just throw a number out there, 600, right? If you could take 600 to a 4 board for a triple, then try and take that same 600 to a 3 board, same 600 to a 2 board, right? If at a 2 board you start getting it's a little too tight, you're not getting to the board, right? Well, then you got to figure out why. Is my technique off? Is the shirt too tight? Is the collar too high? Well, there's all these things that as a geared lifter, you're now worrying about, right? Is the shirt sitting properly? If it's too low, it's gonna be harder to touch. If it's too high, you're not gonna get as much support. So there's all these things that you need to worry about and kind of think of when you're just in the gear itself, but also trying to break in new stuff.
Yeah, I just want to kind of harp on the point too, like, because a lot of times, especially coming from a raw lifting background, and a lot of times raw lifting, if you're doing like a linear progression, you might progress in, start with higher reps, go to lower reps, you might do more sets and all this stuff. So since there is a higher skill component, we're probably going to do, more doubles, triples, singles, but also like the weight could stay relatively similar for many weeks, but you're progressing the range of motion or maybe doing a harder variation. So the approach, the strategy is going to be a little bit different. Than if you're trying to like peak or progress, like say like a raw squat or a raw bench, like for example. So I think that was great. And I'd just say like just be patient with the shirt.
Have to be patient with any gear lifting. You have to be patient. You have to be patient, but you also have to get used to that pressure, right? If you've never gotten into any gear and you do, I'm telling you now, the pressure is not comfortable, right? And that's what kind of deters people from gear lifting. Is that pressure, right? You can take a 600-pound raw squat with really tight knee wraps and a belt. There's pressure, trust me. But when you wedge yourself under a bar that's this high because you're squatting this wide, and you have to kind of brace and deal with a 10-second negative to try and get to depth. There's some pressure going on, right? If you look at any multiply lifter after a meet, pop blood vessels everywhere, right? Because of that pressure. And that's something that just letting you, if you've never gotten into gear, it's coming, because it's something that a lot of people struggle with.
I think so we've kind of covered the bench. So same thing, if like a squat suit or a deadlift suit, what are some like strategies when you're kind of breaking in new equipment for that?
So I'll always, if I get new briefs and a new suit, I'll always try and break them in separately, and then put them together. So if I get a new pair of briefs and a new suit, I'll try and break in the briefs first, and then break in the suit without the briefs, and then put them, and then tie it back together. Squat wise, I like the box squat. I've seen a lot of carryover when I switched to starting to box squat in gear. I used to stay away from it. I got back towards it more recently, and I've seen a nice little increase in my squat. So what I'll do to break in is I will start, again, just like the bench, sit back to where I'm still maintaining good technique, right? As soon as you shift out of that good technique, that's where that's one, where you run the risk of injury. And two, you don't want to keep practicing those bad techniques. So if you have really tight briefs and you set a box down and you can't get to the box, that's fine, add a mat. Add 2 mats. Add 3 mats, I don't care, right? It's not meet day, the first day you put your briefs on. I don't care if you don't hit depth on day 1 with new briefs, right? If you don't hit depth a week before your meet, then you have a different story, right? But if you're 10 weeks out and you're squatting this high still because you got a new pair of briefs, it's not the end of the world. Don't go posting it on the internet, because then you get ripped apart. But, just saying, it's not.
That's a pro tip right there. Just keep that video to yourself.
Keep that video to yourself. You save it in your phone, you look back on it in a couple weeks, that's okay. Don't put it on Instagram. But it's okay with new gear if you're not hitting depth, right? But you gotta progress, right? You gotta work your way down. You have to eventually know what depth feels like, because that much could feel like night and day.